Would you like to play some football?
And welcome to another edition of Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. It is finally time for the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. I'm George Schroeder.
And I'm Brad Edwards, and I don't know what to say other than play ball. I mean, we're recording on Sunday evening, and we're about 48 hours from kick of the first quarterfinal. And, look, there have been a lot of other bowl games played since the last time we talked. I don't know that there's... Yeah, some fun, some really exciting ones to watch. But at the end of the day, I don't know that there's any point in diving into any of that, rehashing it. The ACC is having an awful bowl season, but to me, that doesn't mean anything. So I'm
glad you said that, because it doesn't mean anything. And we're not going to, we're going to dive right into these quarterfinals in the playoff. But you're going to hear people try to justify try to say things about SMU and about Clemson, which obviously were first-round losers in the playoff. You're going to hear people talk about that, and I'm just here to tell you that ain't right. That's not right. The overall bowl record of a league never really mattered, but it has never mattered less than it matters now.
Yeah.
It never really mattered. What if you wanted to pick something out in a non-conference tilt that mattered, it's regular season non-conference games. Might tell you something about the strength of a league. Bowls were always such, crapshoots, basically, I guess. Probably not the word I wanted there, but that's what they were, because you couldn't tell who wanted to be there and who didn't want to be there.
That was just motivation.
That's when they all played.
Yeah, right.
And now, so many opt-outs, so many transfer portals, it's just not even worth talking about. It's just a fun, hopefully, exhibition for your team, and maybe a way to get ready for next year and that kind of thing.
And I would say, George, I would say it's more of that than it ever has been, because now you're getting a chance to, because of the opt-outs, some guys entering the portal, you've got a chance to see some backups who didn't get a lot of significant playing time or playing time in significant moments, to get an idea of how do they look when they're going against the other team's ones. And is this a guy I can count on for next year, or do I need to be looking into the portal for someone who can start at this position next season? And so I think there's a lot more of that going on than there is concern about whether they get the win or the loss on the part of coaches, going to these bowl games.
Most definitely true. I think that's right. And I mean, you cannot draw much from it at all. Inevitably, people will, and you're going to make your league or your team look good, and you're going to shoo it away if they don't look good. I'm just here to tell you, they don't matter. I like them. I don't want the bowls to go away, but they don't matter.
Right.
At least in terms of the larger picture, especially as relates to who should or shouldn't be in the playoff or how someone should have been seeded. The other bowl games, the non-playoff bowls, do not matter to your argument, period.
Right.
You and I are in agreement on that, which is good. Maybe it doesn't make for a great podcast, but it's probably good.
No, and I will say one thing that I am looking forward to diving into. I don't know if it's next week, 2 weeks from now, whenever we have a chance. I'm interested in the ratings for these games, and the fact that the playoff began before Christmas. Has that at all affected how many people are interested in watching these games that are played, say, from the 26th through the 30th, where most of the bowl season falls?
Right.
And that doesn't say anything as to whether any individual person should or shouldn't watch. If you enjoy watching it, I know a lot of people, I'm sure you do too, who just have it on as background, right? They're going about their routine, and they always have football on because it's always on. Mm-hmm. That's what they do. But I am interested in knowing a little bit more about whether starting the playoffs sooner did affect, at least to some degree, the interest in people had in watching games that, to be honest, they don't mean any less now than they did in the 4-team format. The only difference is that the playoff has already started before these games kicked off. So
that's right. No, I'll be interested too. I will say this: the early indication was that some of the ratings were similar to past years, and they were thus. Here's the sad truth for fans of other sports in college sports. Your great ratings in February for a big-time regular season conference basketball game, big-time conference basketball game, and I'm talking North Carolina Duke in a good year, is like the Pop-Tarts Bowl
Yeah,
or
if
something like
even,
the Pop-Tarts.
yeah.
Yeah, the Pop-Tarts Bowl typically outrates it, and so, which by the way, I picked that one out because I love the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I am, it is the height of American culture.
By the
That's
way,
what
when I
it
was
is,
a
man.
kid, if that bowl had existed, that would have been one of my favorite bowls, just to
Mm-hmm.
watch the Pop-Tarts running around out there. But
That to me is
those were
much
different
better than
times.
the what is it, the Duke's Mayo Bowl where the coach gets the mayo
Yeah,
dumped on his head.
we still have that one
Um
to look forward to.
well, first of all, I hate mayonnaise, and so I can't even imagine that. That would be awful. That would be throwing the game to avoid that. If I was, I don't, kids, I don't really endorse throwing games. I want you to know that, but I would be doing that. Hey, but enough about that. We said we were going to talk about the quarterfinals, the college football playoff quarterfinals. It feels like it was a long time ago, those first round matchups on campus. But I am now ready, and we talked all about that in the previous episode of the podcast. Go back and check it out. I'm now ready. I'm ready for Tuesday night, New Year's Eve, Penn State, Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. I'm ready for a trifecta, a trio of games on New Year's Day to decide who gets to go to the semifinals. I'm ready now. I'm raring to go. I needed Christmas, a little decompression, but it's
Yeah,
time. Let's go. You just want to roll through them real quick and let's see what we
sure.
get. Penn State, Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. And immediately my thoughts go back to the first time I ever saw Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. I was there. That was back in the day. I wasn't covering Oklahoma. I was still working for the Oklahoma City paper, but I was covering the Big 12 at that time. And I was there when Boise State pulled off that unbelievable collection of tricks and beat Oklahoma. It was a pretty blah Oklahoma team, but it was a Big 12 champion. And that's when Boise announced themselves really in truth and reality to the world. What a tremendous finish to a game. But Penn State, Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. Boise State with one of those controversial buys because of being getting that automatic qualifier and an automatic bye as a conference champion. And Penn State, of course, won on its home field, beat up on SMU. And we've just been waiting to see what Boise State has. What are you looking forward to out of this game? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everybody else, how will Boise State hang in there? Is this a game that they're going to have a chance to win in the fourth quarter?
Mm-hmm.
I hate to use the phrase, do they look like they belong? But I think that's generally the way a lot of people are going to look at it. I mean, we remember the one time in the 4-team playoff that a group of 5 got in. It was Cincinnati was it 21? I believe it was. And they drew Alabama. I don't even think they scored a touchdown. It was something like 24-3, somewhere in that range was the final score. And it was never a game. And I think that's what people are wanting to know is because, I mean, look, based on the week 2 performance at Oregon, when Boise State lost on a field goal in the final play of the game after Oregon had scored 2 special teams touchdowns just to get it to that point tied. Boise, I mean, the one example we have of them playing one of these top teams, they had an opportunity to win that game in a true road environment. And so I don't think there's any reason to just dismiss this and say, no, it's a different level of competition. Now, look, they did have some games toward the end of the season where I think they played down to their competition a little bit, and I think there are some skeptics
or a lot bit. I mean,
yeah.
And that was a different level of competition the other direction. I mean, you're talking about the Wyomings of the world, and Wyoming was not very good even by Wyoming standards this year. So, but I interrupted you. Keep going. Sorry.
Right, and look, and Austin Genty, who almost won the Heisman Trophy. A lot of people felt like he should have. He's going to have a chance now against a defense that has been pretty good for most of the season, not every game, but certainly that would be, legitimizing for him. Oh, I tell you what, I want to come back to a soapbox thing here related to him in this game in just a little bit, but it's a tangent from the question you asked. But basically, what I'm looking forward to is exactly that, which is, will Boise compete? And it's not just this game, but I think over the 4 games, and this might take a couple of years, is trying to get a feel for if we continue to have a format where it's more than a week In this case, it's about 11 days or so from the from the first round to the quarterfinals. Is the advantage to the team that played more recently? Because there's a part of me that thinks like, yeah, it's always nice to have a week off, but to have a month off in between games, I can see where that could be a disadvantage, and it might actually favor the teams that played not that long ago. So yeah, I'm curious, not necessarily just this game being the data point that tells us that, but over the next couple of years saying, okay, is it, I mean, look, I'd always look, I would agree with anyone who said mathematically, you've got a better chance to win having to play one fewer game. That's undeniable, but I can see there being a case made for, hey, you know what, all things being equal, I would rather have played 10 days ago than not played, 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, so, I know. You're talking about being rusty is what you're talking about.
Right.
I would like to say it's not even being rested, but it's being, I'm going to go all preacher on us and only use R's. It'll be this alliteration kick that you're going to hate. It's also being recovered or rehabilitated, rehabbed is a big, big deal. That's why if you haven't played for a month, or here's another one. If you're Georgia, obviously Carson Beck, and we're going to get to them in a few minutes, but Carson Beck's not going to play, but you're putting in the young kid, the backup. Well, look at all the time you had to get him ready too. So man, I'm all over the R's. This would be great if I had a sermon outline, either that or people who rolling their eyes and heading for the exits, but which is, most weeks anyway. No, but I hear what you're saying, but you're talking about rust. I think that's a very real question. Rust, because you've had a month between games versus kind of getting back into the rhythm of things. There's another R. Oh, my goodness, this is going to be terrible if I keep this up. But I do think there's something to be said for rest and recovery. And I think that's what those coaches would probably tell you. You get to the end of a long season with the prospect of several more games, and you're right, one fewer game is one thing they would tell you about. But the prospect of several more games, if you can heal from those bangs and bruises, that's a good thing, I think. And I know we are hopping down a rabbit trail, but that's what we do. That's why this podcast is either fun or maddening, depending on someone's point of view, I guess.
And I do also wonder, in terms of Boise State, is this where it's an advantage to them having played in a conference that is not as demanding from a physical perspective? Now, I don't mean that they don't play football physically. What I mean is just in the Mountain West, players are not on average as big, as strong as they are in the Big Ten,
as fast,
and I think as fast, all those things, and you wonder, like, a season of that, is Penn State more worn down from that than Boise State would be, having played the same or similar number of games at this point, but not the constant level of pounding that a Penn State would take, and I think that's another thing that would be fascinating. Not that the outcome of this game is going to tell us definitively on that. But
we got three more that we have the same questions, and we'll see what kind of answers we get.
This is the one, though, because it is the group of five that I think that people are more likely to draw certain conclusions from. Whether that's fair or not, but let's just start with this,
question.
George.
We overdo that. Go ahead.
Yeah, we do. But I think in this case, just looking at this Boise State team, this is not a blanket statement about any other group of five to come out in the future, nor any from the past. But as
that's
reliant,
a nice disclaimer, bro.
Well, no, but I'm as reliant as Boise State is on the performance of one player. I do feel like this one seems pretty simple. If Penn State can shut him down, or even slow him down, keep him around 100 yards.
I think 130 is fine. I mean.
But if they keep him around 100, and certainly if they keep him under 100, I really have a hard time seeing Boise win this game, because I don't know that enough of their other players are quite at the level of what Penn State has position by position.
Well, there's a little bit of, I would say two things about Penn State. Okay. I agree with that analysis, first of all, and I agree with that. And also agree that if you are dependent on one player, as great as Ashton Jeanty was, I would rather it be a quarterback.
Yeah.
Like Vanderbilt needs Diego Pavia, right? That kind of thing, than a running back, because the versatility is there, spreading the ball around and that kind of thing. That said, that is not a slam on Ashingenti at all. He's tremendous. He's really good. And the fact that he is still at Boise State is an amazing thing, too, in the portal era. But I do wonder this about Penn State, to go back to where I was. Penn State played well this year, got handled at home by Ohio State, which, Ohio State's been good most of the year, had the inexplicable loss to Michigan, and then looked tremendous. And we'll talk about them in a little bit here in their first round game. But I don't want to overstate Penn State as some juggernaut based on they played really well against Oregon. I never really thought in the Big Ten championship game that Oregon was really in serious danger. They kept pulling within a score, and Oregon would take it back to 2, within a score and back to 2. I felt like Oregon was pretty much in control, but Penn State played really well. And then, of course, they played really well in the first round at home. And I don't want to overdo that. This is not the same thing. I'm trying to choose my words carefully as Boise was going up against Ohio State.
You're just saying, man for man, this isn't one of the 3 or 4 most talented teams in the country. Penn State.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, they're probably in the 5 to 10 range in terms of talent, but
right, which is not where Boise is. No offense.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, and I also think Penn State is it's not the kind of offense that's going to run off and leave you most of the time. Although Drew Aller has played a lot better down the stretches, look really good, and they've got running backs. They can move the ball. Their defense is good though, and that takes you back to where you were. I know at some point here we actually have to make a pick. This is a fascinating game, though, because it's going to get viewed through that specific prism that you talked about. Inevitably, this is the first time, yes, Cincinnati, you're right, but this is the first real time. And these guys, the Boise State is essentially the original BCS buster, essentially. I mean, Fresno State would like a word from the early 2000s, but Boise State's the original. And they finally get a shot in the playoff. And so it's going to be viewed through all of that prism. I would say this too. Do not overlook, as you said before, September 7 in Eugene, when they gave Oregon all it wanted. Now, Oregon got better and better and better as the year went on, but who's to say Boise State didn't? And, they escaped a couple teams down the stretch, but who's to say Boise State didn't get better and better as the year went on? So, should we make some picks, or
go ahead?
Talking about this,
make a pick, and I will. Then I'll mention the one other thing I want to say on this game before we move on.
All right. Before I do that, we're going to do our picks a little bit different this week. We're going to talk about each game and make a pick at the end of each of the 4 quarterfinal games. But as they have been for the last several weeks, our picks are being sponsored by the Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary. Think deep, lead strong, run the race well. The Faith and Sports Institute is a team of athletes, coaches, chaplains, and scholars who provide theological education, compelling research, and formative practices for Christian leaders in sports. They've got graduate degree programs, online certificate programs, and they even have fully online, a Master of Arts in Theology and Sports Studies. That's the Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary. Appreciate those guys for sponsoring the picks. We had Dr. Paul Putz, the director of the Faith and Sports Institute, on with us last week. And so they are sponsoring our picks. And so I will go right ahead and tell you I'm going to pick my Fiesta Bowl pick. Penn State versus Boise State is, drum roll please, and this is where the producer puts the drum roll in, right? Penn State.
Okay.
I can't pick Boise. I would like to. I love their story going all the way back. In fact, the other thing is, before that Fiesta Bowl that I covered when they beat Oklahoma, I went out to Boise and kind of wrote about the genesis of this sort of up from the bootstraps program. And the school itself was a junior college, and the origin of the blue turf and all that kind of stuff. So I love the story. I love the fact that they've got a shot here, but I think Penn State's better.
Yeah, I agree. Mine kind of comes down to something you said earlier, which is that the player that Boise State depends the most on is not a guy who the ball's going to be in his hands every single play. He's not the quarterback. And because of that, and the talent gap that there is at a lot of positions on the field, I do like Penn State as well. I will not be surprised if Boise hangs around. But then just to kind of tip off on something I mentioned earlier. If you gave me the choice of having played 11 days ago or having played 4 weeks ago, I would rather have played 11 days ago. So I think that advantage is also in Penn State's, favor. And so I like Penn State to win the game. I hope we get a good one. I know everybody's anxious for a competitive playoff game because obviously none of the first 4 really ended up being that. And somewhere in the quarterfinals, we're going to get 1 or 2, I would expect. They're going to be memorable. So. And so I don't know that I'm expecting this one to be that, but I'm looking forward to it. And so along the lines of the Boise State running game and Austin Genty, here's my thing. One of the storylines, if you haven't already been reading about it, then when the game comes on, it will be discussed. I don't know off the top of my head what the number is, how many yards Genty has to go to reach Barry Sanders' single season NCAA record.
I think it's 131, and I should have looked that up, right?
Okay. See if you can find it while I'm saying this. Because,
I will. Go ahead.
Because there have been a few guys, not many, but a few guys in the past who have come close enough to the record that going into a bowl game, they were at least talking about it as a possibility. And I will say today, just like I said back then, I don't care what happens. Nobody is truly breaking Barry Sanders' record. And I heard someone like during I think it was during the Mountain West Championship game, made the comment that, that he was putting up Barry Sanders-like numbers. And it's like, no, he's not. For those who weren't alive then, I would recommend that you go back and you look at Barry Sanders. If you can find his game by game for 1988, look at it and you ask yourself the question, are these two things alike? And Ashton Genty's season has been fantastic. Barry Sanders was at a different level. And George, I know someone who spent as much time as you did in the state of Oklahoma. I don't have to convince you of this. That season, in my opinion, was the greatest single season by any offensive player in the history of college football. And I don't even have a close second. In addition to whatever that number is that he rushed for in, I think it was 11 games. It was either 10 or 11 games. I think it was 11. He played a 12th game. They had a bowl game that year against Wyoming, and he ran for, I think it was 222 yards in that bowl game. The NCAA did not begin counting bowl statistics on the regular season total until, I want to say it was 2002. Right. And so they didn't go back and retroactively add the bowl games that they already have records for.
They've stubbornly refused to do that.
They have. And to me, whatever Barry Sanders' number is, you should add 222 yards to it and say that's what he did in 12 games, right? And at this point, Austin Genty is about to play his, 14th game?
Right. So that's what Barry Sanders did in 12 games, adding in the bowl game, 11 plus a bowl game.
Right.
And Ashton Genty has now played 13 games. This will be his 15th game.
This will be his 14th game, and he needs 131 yards to break what Barry Sanders did in 11 games. But Barry Sanders has another 222 yards they're not counting. So, get upset if you want to, but I know I'm not alone as far as the old-timers who have a lot of reverence for what Barry Sanders did. And as far as I'm concerned, that is the record. And until someone does it in, I would say, until someone breaks it in 12 games, it's not the record to me. You can put whatever you want in the NCAA record book, but as far as I'm concerned,
you mean in 11 games?
No. But what I'm saying is, if someone in 12 games can do what Barry Sanders did in 12 games, then I'll give you the record.
Right. Which, to be fair, to Barry, the point here is, as good as Ashton Genty is, he's already played 13, and he's 253 yards behind what Barry Sanders did in 12.
No, he's more than that. He's like 350. You said he's 130.
Yeah, 350, whatever it is, right? It's 131 and 222.
Right.
Add those together, whatever that is. Yeah.
350 something yards short. So
let's try our math. He's already played one more game. He's 350 some odd yards short.
Let's say Boise State wins this game and he gets another game. He's still, even if he gets there, played 3-4 more games.
Yep. All right.
That's my soapbox. And every time someone comes close to Barry Sanders, I have to just say that they're not really close to Barry Sanders.
That's good. It's good. I love it. And by the way, Ashton Jeanty is a fabulous talent.
Right.
There's no
I said the
sleep to
same
him.
thing when it was,
Right.
Kevin Smith at UCF. I don't remember what year that was, but people will get a raw number that will be close, but on average, you're
Right.
not doing what Barry did.
That's right. All right. 3 games on New Year's Day. So the Fiesta Bowl, you and I both have Penn State beating Boise State. That's the Boise State fans on line 1 for you, Brad, because of your take on Ashton Jeanty. January 1, New Year's Day, Peach Bowl, followed by the Rose Bowl, followed by the Sugar Bowl. Texas versus Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. What are you thinking here?
All right, this one actually is not all that different from the one we just picked, where you've got a team that is relying heavily on a running back. And, once again, it's not
Cam
like they don't have
Scatabo,
anything else. Right. Cam Scatabo and Texas has a better defense than Penn State. And I think Texas is going to be more difficult to run on than Penn State. And to me, this game is as simple as that, which is I don't think it's a good matchup for Arizona State. I think there are some other teams that they would have a better matchup with. I don't think Texas is one of them. And so I think I'll be more surprised if this is a game midway through the fourth quarter than I will be if Boise State and Penn State is a game midway through the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I agree with that. And let me tell you why. I think Texas's offense is erratic, but can really get it done. Okay.
Yeah.
But of the 8 teams left, and frankly, of all 12 teams, Texas has the best defense. That's my opinion. But I think Texas has the best defense. And I'm not sure that it's super close.
I think Ohio State is there.
Fair enough.
I think they're in that neighborhood.
That's fair enough. And look, Oregon's got a halfway decent defense too. They all got good defenses. I think Texas has the best. Regardless, I just think this will be something Arizona State hasn't seen. And I like Texas. I like Texas in this. I like Texas in this a lot. I actually think the Big 12 was so jumbled up that I appreciate what Arizona State's done. Kenny Dillingham did a tremendous job. They were picked 16th out of 16 in the preseason. Now, those polls are worth the paper they're printed on, or it's not even on paper anymore. But that said, typically when you're listed as 16th out of 16, you're not going to win the thing, right? But there was a big logjam at the top. They were one of the tie-breaking teams that got into the Big 12 championship game, and they won it. Congratulations. Tremendous year. I'm glad they're in the playoff. It's a great story. I'm one of those guys that thinks Arizona State is actually a sleeping giant that should become something because of its location, and maybe it will, especially in this new look Big 12. I think it's got every shot to do that. That said, Texas is too much. I'm not ready to fast forward Texas all the way in to winning the whole thing because of the offense, because I think Quinn Ewers can be a question mark at times.
Yeah.
But they're going to win the Peach Bowl. That's my pick.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what's fascinating about the perception that at least the two of us have, I'm sure we're not alone, that there is a pretty sizable talent gap between these teams, is that these are the last 2 Big 12 champions. Texas won that league last year. Yep. Arizona State won it this year. So according to us, there's a big drop off.
I don't think there's any question there's a big drop off between Texas and what Oklahoma had been over the last few years before they've fallen off the map, obviously, and the new look Big 12. Those are different. Those programs are built different, and most certainly Texas currently constituted is built different than any of those Big 12 teams that it left behind. No question.
Yeah. Yep.
I agree with that. So you're picking Texas.
Picking Texas also.
Okay. I knew that. All right, let's go over to the San Gabriel Mountains, the sun setting over the San Gabriels. My favorite scene in college football, and grateful to have had the chance to cover several of those Rose Bowls, always on that afternoon of New Year's Day. And I love that part of the tradition. Just the time slot that they get because of the weather and the way the sun hits the San Gabriels, you don't want to change it. But you actually get what looks like a traditional Big Ten Pac-12 matchup, but it's Ohio State and Oregon. It's 2 Big Ten teams. Ohio State, Oregon in the Rose Bowl. This feels like to me that it might be the best 2 teams playing. In fact, I think it is the best 2 teams playing. I don't mean that either is going to win the national championship, the winner is, but it feels like the best two teams playing. And maybe that's recency bias based on what Ohio State did to Tennessee. I know it is. But I think Ohio State is a whole lot more like that team than the inexplicable team we saw lose to Michigan. This is the best matchup to me we may see and I'm intrigued by the next one, the Sugar, but this is the one that I cannot miss.
Yeah.
On Wednesday, New Year's Day.
So I kind of look at it as I think Ohio State has the highest ceiling of any team in the country. When they play their A-plus game, I don't think anyone else can beat them. Now, they've had enough times they haven't played the A-plus game that there's no question they could lose in this round, they could lose in the next round. Oregon, on the other hand, I think has played at least their A game more often than any other team in the country this year. And so I think it's the team that has been the best and the most consistent this season against the team that has the potential to be the best on a given day. And obviously when they played the first time, it came down to the last play where you could literally say Ohio State ran out of time. If there's one more play in the game,
another second or two, they kick a field goal.
Well, they at least get the attempt, right? They at least get the attempt.
I'm not saying they hit it, but they at least kick a field goal and maybe win the game.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so the first matchup was that good, and it was in Eugene, and you would think that makes a difference. Now, neutral field, this is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I look back at Ohio State and their season and just kind of, it's not like they had a lot of downs, but the times that I can remember them where they didn't play like you would expect them to play often came after a game where they looked really good. And you're like, that's the team. And the thing I worry about with them is that they silence so many doubters, at least for one evening, right? With the performance against Tennessee, do they buy into that and think, all right, now we've got it figured out? Or do they approach this game with the same attitude they approached the last one, that they still have something to prove? Now, the fact that they already lost to this team once would tell you they should come in with that same chip on their shoulder, feeling like they have something to prove, not going to, that they, can't let a team beat them twice in the same season. But who knows? I think that Oregon is going to try to do what so many teams have tried to do against Ohio State, which is put the game in Will Howard's hands. And even though he's a good quarterback, I don't think he's an elite quarterback. And I think that's your best chance to beat them, is that he makes a few mistakes and, you're able to – I was about to say you're able to hit some big plays on them, but Oregon really just consistently drove the ball up and down the field on them pretty much all game in that first meeting. So I don't even know that they need the explosives. They just got in a good rhythm, and Ohio State never found an answer for Oregon's offense. So I see this one going either way. I'm going to take Oregon. I'm going to take Oregon to win again.
Okay.
I am.
Well, I think Ohio State looked tremendous against Tennessee. It was like, that is the highest ceiling team. There's no question when they get it all together. I think they'll be plenty motivated. I don't think that you sort of rest on your laurels because you showed everybody, like you sort of said, could be a problem. I think you also lost to Oregon early. I think all those things are right and true. I think they're really, really good. I also think there's still pressure on Ohio State because of the Michigan loss. And because even before the Michigan loss, this team was assembled over the offseason with sort of bringing in people from the portal and retaining people who could have gone pro by spending a ton of money. And it was well documented. They spent a lot of money to assemble and retain this unit, not just to beat Michigan, but to win the national title. They're built to win it. So there's a ton of pressure on them, and it's still on them in a lot of ways, even more so because of the loss to Michigan.
And I think some of that is because Michigan won the national championship last year.
No question.
Where it was like, you know what? We cannot let Michigan have the upper hand. We've got to go out and win one so that they can't talk anymore. And, of course, the fact that Michigan went into their place a few weeks ago and beat them has just made that even more essential, that they close the deal and win this whole thing.
Right. And 10 years ago was the last time they won a title. And
the first year of the 4-team playoff.
First year of the 4-team playoff. Won the title, beating Oregon. I just want to say this. We've talked all about Ohio State. I think there's a tendency, even though Oregon has been ranked number one for, the latter half of the year, and all they've done is taken care of business and looked good doing it most weeks, looked really good doing it some weeks, and they're unbeaten. regardless of all that, I think we tend to think of Oregon like we would have thought of them 10 years ago or a couple of years before that when they went unbeaten and then played Auburn in the BCS title game and played really well, but suddenly they weren't able to score the ball. They did slow down Auburn, and Auburn won on a field goal at the end. But we have a tendency to look at them like that. This Oregon team is built an awful lot like an Ohio State. I was going to say like a Georgia, because that's where Dan Lanning came. He came from. He was a defense coordinator at Georgia, and he certainly built them along the lines in that SEC mold. But I say they look an awful lot like an Ohio State because Ohio State looks like an SEC team along the lines routinely. Yeah. What's different about Ohio State than a Georgia most of the time is just the speed. The speed and the explosives on offense. Or Georgia's, and I'm going to get myself in trouble here with all our SEC fans, Georgia has sort of been a little bit more like in the old Nick Saban mold, pound you, and then hit a couple of big plays. Ohio State has done it with kind of the pizzazz type of stuff, more like what you saw the latter years of Saban at Alabama once he adjusted. That's what Oregon looks to me. They're built to stack up with these teams, with the Georgias, with the Ohio States and everybody else. They look a lot like what you expect Ohio State to look like. And so I think routinely, and this is crazy, I'm not trying to play the no respect card like every coach in the world does when his team's ranked number one. But I do think we have probably not thought enough about Oregon. And I know that
we've under-discussed Oregon, right?
We've definitely on this podcast under-discussed Oregon because they just kept doing what they needed to do, and there was probably more drama in other places.
They were too predictable. They weren't fun to discuss because they were predictable. They were consistent.
All that said, I think this has got a chance to be a tremendous game. I will not be surprised if Ohio State wins it, and I will not be surprised if Ohio State were to win it and win the whole thing. But I'm picking Oregon, and I think Oregon.
Wow, you're also going that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Oregon is really good, and despite being number one, despite being the top seed, is under. It's not. They're not disrespected. They're just sort of underplayed in our minds.
Maybe
and I
underappreciated.
don't mean us. I mean all of us.
Yeah.
Underappreciated is the word.
George, I think you're right about your assessment that a lot of people still think of them as the Chip Kelly era Oregon teams, where it's a lot more, it's about speed and hitting big plays, but they're not going to beat you in the trenches. And you're right. This is a different Oregon team. And look, there's no better opportunity to prove that to America, that this is a different type of football team than by winning this game. And then of course, if we're right, it'll be winning the next one after that, which would be against a Texas team that's obviously very physical at the line of scrimmage. And then if they win that one, they're going to get somebody on that other side of the bracket. So whoever wins this tournament will have earned it. And you're not going to win it by being finesse or just relying on speed. This whole thing is going to be won in the trenches. And you are correct. And we both agree Oregon is good enough there to win games like this, that in the past, this would have been one of the few teams in the country that they didn't really match up with, but that's no longer the case.
Yep.
At least in our opinion. And
I think
we'll see. Ohio State might go out there and win by 3 touchdowns again. But
I agree with your assessment that Ohio State has the highest ceiling, but Oregon's ceiling is really close to that, and they played closer to it more often, I think. So I won't be surprised either way, but I do think this could be the year finally that Phil Knight gets his national title and all of that kind of stuff. I will tell you this, I got one kid in the household who is really hoping Oregon wins it. And that would be, and he's not really in the household, that would be our older son, George. But that's not the reason for the pick. You hear me, George? That's not the reason. And the reason I say that is my son actually does listen to my podcast and your podcast occasionally. So usually to tell me why I should have picked Oregon.
Yeah.
So, all right, last one of the night, January 1, Wednesday night, New Year's Day. New Year's evening, Notre Dame, Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Notre Dame versus Georgia. This one has got sort of big picture intrigue all over it just because it's Notre Dame and can they do it? Georgia is, what they've become, but what are they this year? Then you have Carson Beck is out. He's had surgery for his UCL. He's done, and he's actually declared for the draft, I guess, right? But he is done, and they're going to be going with Gunnar Stockton, backup, who came in and played pretty well in the second half against Texas in the SEC title game. And he's now had a month to prepare as the starter because they knew, regardless of how they were acting, they knew Beck was done. And so they've been preparing Gunner to be the guy. This one drips with all sorts of question marks, all sorts of, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, look, this is, I guess, in some ways reminiscent of the Ohio State team from 10 years ago, where they had some quarterback injuries, including the one to JT Barrett in the Michigan game. And then they bring in Cardell Jones for the Big Ten championship game. But that game was so lopsided and got out of hand so early, you didn't get a really good feel for exactly what Cardell Jones was going to do in that offense and what his strengths were. And I know Alabama in that semifinal was really caught off guard, especially by how much they used him as a runner. And I think there's that same opportunity here. All anybody really has to go off of is the second half of that SEC championship game. And Stockton did do a good bit of running, did a little bit of passing. But now they've had 4 weeks to basically design an offense, or at least packages, around what he does better than Carson Beck. I mean, assuming that he has skills that Beck doesn't have.
Let me just say this. Okay. I mean, maybe he runs better than Carson Beck because Beck didn't run well at all. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
So
I'm just going to say there's a reason he was the backup. And
absolutely.
And very, very little time.
But what I'm getting at is that they have time here to put together some things to really emphasize his strengths.
You're right.
Obviously, they have time to rehearse certain things and find a variation of plays or even combinations of plays that they can practice over and over and over. Things that you probably wouldn't do during the regular season that they can do specifically for this matchup. Because they do have this one opportunity, maybe, to catch an opponent off guard with the type of quarterback he is. And so if there are things about him that are very different from Carson Beck, then I think that's really the challenge for Notre Dame is, what do you go off of that you prepare for? So here's one thing I was looking at is that probably the two quarterbacks that gave, in fact, that's not no probable about it, definitely the two quarterbacks that gave Georgia's defense the most difficulty this season, I'm flipping to the other side of the ball now, were Jalen Milroe at Alabama and Haynes King at Georgia Tech. Both of those guys rushed for 100 yards and threw for 300. Okay, and I look at Notre Dame, and Riley Leonard is obviously a dual threat quarterback, right? So same basic mold. Maybe he's a little bit more like Haynes King than he is like Jalen Milroe. And part of what I'm about to say might be that Notre Dame just dominated a lot of opponents, and so he didn't really have to do more. But he didn't have a 300-yard passing game this season. I think he only had one game, maybe it was two at the most, but I think it was only one that he rushed for 100. So Notre Dame does not like to use Leonard as much as Alabama and Georgia Tech leaned on their quarterback in those games. But I do see that Georgia's defense is susceptible to a lot of things that dual threat quarterbacks present. And so that's a question for me is, will Notre Dame roll out something, well, not necessarily anything new, but just more Riley Leonard than we have seen and typically would see in the regular season? Because I do know this about Georgia's defense is that when we have seen them in situations where their back has been against the wall, that rush defense they have shown up in a big way. And that is step one to defending Notre Dame, is slowing down those running backs. And I believe Georgia can do that. The question is, does Notre Dame have a counter? And I think they have the type of quarterback you need to have a counter. The question is, can he show up in that moment the way those other two quarterbacks that I just mentioned did?
Yeah, maybe. Listen, I think the bigger issue here, and I agree that the question is, can Riley Leonard beat them with his arm and his feet together? And I think he's a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. I think this Notre Dame team is not the same as what we've seen Notre Dame teams look like as when they've gotten to this stage in the past. I think it's built differently, built a little bit better, a little bit like what we talked about Oregon, I guess. Here's the other thing I want to say. This Georgia team is not the Georgia team from 2 or 3 years ago.
No.
Not close. And we've seen that borne out throughout the year. I'm not saying they can't win the national championship. That's not what I'm saying. I think there's 4 or 5 teams out of this 8 that could win it. That's one of the cool things about this thing. And probably all 8 could win this week, but 4 or 5 could win the whole thing. Georgia's one of those 4 or 5. But this is not the same Georgia team as a couple years ago, 3 years ago, whatever. It's just not. on either side of the ball, but especially offensively, they're just not as good. And I just got to be honest with you. I can't look at this game and go, oh yeah, they're just going to plug in Gunnar Stockton, and it's going to be not only seamless, but maybe even better, which is what you kind of hear out of Athens.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
Well, if it was better, Carson Beck was meh enough this year, you'd have already chunked it and tried that if you thought it was better. Here's what I'm going to say. Yes, he looked pretty good in the second half against Texas, the SEC championship game. That should not be overlooked. Keep in mind, though, Texas had not prepared for him at all. And while we don't know exactly what Georgia is trying to set up for him to do well, we do know that he's who Notre Dame is preparing for. That's the thing here, right? Because basically what happened is Texas prepared for Carson Beck, and then he didn't play in the second half. And that's no excuse. You still got to make the stops, and this kid made plays. He made some really nice plays, but it felt a little bit like he was drawing it up in the dirt sometimes and making plays just out there doing it. And so maybe he'll be better, as you said, because they prepared some things for him. But he's going to have been prepared for by Notre Dame. I think that's a big deal. There's no element of surprise here. I mean, yes, we don't know exactly what he's going to do, but there's no element of surprise in that we know he's going to be the guy.
Yeah. So the one other playoff case study that comes to mind with a backup quarterback, on this stage.
Wait, didn't Florida State? Wait. Oh,
It's not Florida State.
I know, but had this been a year ago, I just want to say this: had this been a year ago, and there wasn't an automatic qualifier to win your conference championship, would we have had any real conversation about whether Georgia should still be in it? And the answer is probably not, because Georgia. And that's going to make all of our Seminole friends mad.
Yeah.
But anyway, we are in a different system, so they were in it. There was no question.
Yeah.
And I wish Florida State had been in it a year ago. So, but I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So the other backup quarterback situation that comes to mind to a lot of people is Tua coming in the second half of that national championship game against Georgia, which is similar to what you said happened with Georgia in the SEC championship game.
Right.
Texas had not prepared for Gunnar Stockton any more than Georgia had prepared for Tua.
That's right.
He caught them off guard. But I would also say this, having watched those two second halves, Gunnar Stockton was not Tua Tagovailoa. In defense of Gunnar Stockton, Georgia's receivers are not Alabama's receivers from that year when they had four guys, or at least three who ended up being first-round draft picks at that position. That's the thing to me, is that I don't see what Tua did in that championship game against Georgia. I don't see that as a ceiling for Gunnar Stockton. What I imagine what he's going to do is less than that. He's going to need more defense to help him out and reduce the number of plays that he needs to generate on offense in order for them to, it's going to be more of a team victory. Not that wasn't a team victory for Alabama, but I'm just saying he's not going to come in and light up the world, regardless, like you said, of what certain Georgia fans might be thinking about whether he could be the best quarterback that the program's ever seen, or until he has to actually start a game for the first time. But no, I think realistic fans know it's like, hey, look, at this point, you just want him to take care of the ball and give the defense a chance to make plays and win the field position game, and then you find a way to get out of there and get him some experience for the next round. And I think that's the attitude. If we're ready to pick this game, I'm going to take Notre Dame, and I'm going to do it because unless he plays well, I don't think they win. And I'm not saying he can't play well. But knowing nothing about the kid and knowing how unpredictable Georgia has been at many other positions on both sides of the ball this season.
Well, they needed 8 overtimes to beat a decidedly mediocre Georgia Tech team, right? Yeah. They wallowed around a bunch. And yes,
Kentucky took them to the wire, right?
Oh, yeah. And Kentucky's not good. They were bad.
Yep.
Ole
Miss blew them out.
Kiffin would disagree, but otherwise, yeah.
No, but Ole Miss blew out Georgia.
Right.
And I have enough questions about Georgia at other positions on the field, relative, like you said, relative to what they were 2 and 3 years ago.
Right. It's just
That
they're just a half notch or a notch below
yeah,
what they were.
yeah,
Doesn't mean they're not really
and
good. Doesn't mean they can't win the whole thing. It just means they're not what they
and
were, and we need to stop pretending like they are.
would if Carson Beck were playing, would I probably pick Georgia? Yeah, I would say, you know what, if they play, their B minus or C plus game, they would lose. But as long as they play at least a B game or better, they've probably got a little bit more talent than Notre Dame. But with the question at quarterback, along with everything else, I'm more confident in Notre Dame and what they've done since the loss to Northern Illinois, that I know who they are and I know who's going to show up.
Man, I love everything you said. In the interest
Of us not picking the same in all 4 games,
exactly the same, because something wacky is going to happen somewhere. I'm convinced of it. I think these will be better games than we saw in the first round, and I'm okay that the first round was what it was. I also am aware that in the past, the semifinals have featured a bunch of blowouts, just like the first round featured.
yeah,
So these quarterfinals, we shouldn't be surprised if there are some blowouts. But I think there's a lot more parity this year than we've seen in the past. And I think we're going to see some really entertaining games, and potentially something wacky is going to happen. Just because I was going to pick Notre Dame, but I'm going to pick Georgia. I'm going to pick Georgia. I don't think Georgia's going to win the national title. I think they can. I don't think they're going to. But I think they're going to find a way, and there'll be some, and Gunnar Stockton's going to become a folk hero. He already is. He apparently drives a 1984 pickup that used to be his granddad's, and the town he's from has 700 people in it up in the North Georgia mountains. And, as far as we know, he was, playing a banjo on his knee or something like that, right? It's one of those, it's made for college football mythology. And if he leads them to a win here and they continue, look, tremendous. I'm going to pick Georgia because you picked Notre Dame. That's my reasoning. And, that way at least one of us is going to be wrong somewhere, right? Or else
right,
maybe we're going to be wrong on everything. We'll see.
If Georgia wins this game, they'll probably make Gunnar Stockton the topic of a Fansville commercial for next year. So
there's no question.
We have that to look forward to. Now, look, George, I mean, just to support your side of it, I can totally see the possibility Georgia shuts down Notre Dame's running game.
Yes.
They end up in a lot of 3rd and longs. Riley Leonard throws 3 interceptions. Georgia wins the game. I have no problem seeing that happen.
Matchups play into this. If this was Ohio State or Oregon on the other side against Georgia in a backup quarterback, I would be picking Ohio State / Oregon, whichever one it would be, all day long. But the matchups, this doesn't play into Georgia's hands, but it's not like unfavorable. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. No, and like you said, like no offense wants to be in 3rd and long. But some teams are better built to throw the ball if they have to. Notre Dame is not one of those teams. Now, they may be a little bit better built than they have in some other years recently, but they're still not a passing team and not a team that wants to move the ball that way most of the time. So, and the other part of it is, if Georgia gets a lead and Notre Dame's playing from behind, has to get out of what they want to do, I could see that being a difference. But I'm going to stick with my pick because, like I said, Georgia's lack of consistency this season combined with the question mark at quarterback just makes me think that Notre Dame winning is a slightly more likely outcome.
Well, here's what we know. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Tuesday night, you've got which one? The Fiesta Bowl. And then all day, New Year's Day, Wednesday, you've got peach, rose, and sugar right in a row. I'm so excited. I knocked my mic over. And it's going to be great. This is why I'm excited that the playoff was expanded. And it's going to be fun.
By the way, this is like for those of us who are old enough to remember back when New Year's Day used to have more than 2 meaningful games. It's going to feel a little bit like that. Now, the national championship's not going to be decided on New Year's Day like it was back in those years. And I'm talking about, 70s, 80s, those of us who grew up in those years. You would go into New Year's Day with there being more than 2 teams that had a chance, if things broke right, to win the national championship. And there would be 3, maybe 4 bowl games that would be a factor in that. And so that's what I'm looking forward to, is that every one of these games on New Year's Day means something. And we haven't had that in quite a while.
It's going to be fun. All right, let's go ahead and get to the locker room. We'll come back for the second half, and we'll talk about our favorite subject, which is our shared faith in Jesus Christ. Be right back right after this.
The Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary is a place where Christian leaders in sports are formed and equipped through theological education, practical training, and useful resources. As a sports ministry leader, coach, athlete, pastor, or student who wants to learn more, you can apply for admission in an online or residential graduate degree program, take continuing education certificate classes, and participate in character and leadership practicums. Start your journey at baylor.edu/truett/FSI. Think deep, lead strong, and run the race well with the Faith and Sports Institute today.
And welcome back to Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. I am Brad Edwards, joined by George Schroeder, and we are entering the second half here, which means it's time for us to talk about our faith in Jesus. And as always, we get that started with a segment called On My Heart. And George, what's on your heart this week as we close up 2024?
Yeah, listen, this is my favorite segment. I love this segment. I appreciate that last week you talked about Christmas, and I love that. This week, we've been spending some time, and in fact, I'm recording this podcast from the Little Rock area where I grew up. And so we record this on Sunday nights. And so my point is I didn't preach this morning. I wasn't in Texas, wasn't at our church. And instead, we went to a church in the area, and the sermon was on something that really hit me. And it was from Psalm 139, the last couple of verses, Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. I'll read them here in a minute. But the pastor opened by noting that this is the time of year when one of the more recent phenomenon has been, and if you're on email lists or whatever, you get like emails that tell you, let's say you subscribe to Spotify or iTunes, Apple Music or whatever. You get lists that they want to tell you, here is the artist you listened to most last year. Here are your top 5 listens. Netflix or somebody will email you and say, here's what your streaming habits were, which, by the way, probably says, oh my goodness, I watched way too much TV, or what in the world was I doing watching the British Baking Show championship? That wasn't me. That was my wife. But that kind of thing. Or, I don't know, House Hunters International or whatever it is, right? And so but my point is you get these recaps of 2024. Here's how you spent your time. So when we look at, we're going from 2024, and then obviously Wednesday, New Year's Day, is 2025. It's weird to even say that, right? 2025, quarter century into the 21st century. But it's a good time to look back, and it's a good time to look ahead. How am I going to spend this year? And here's what I want to know is, if you've got a recap, if God sent you a recap of how you spent your 2024 with him, what would it look like? Would you be embarrassed that you'd watched too much British Baking Show or whatever? Or would you go, and by the way, none of us can ever go, oh yeah, I really hit it last year. But would you be going, I could really see that I spent time with the Lord? Let me read Psalm 139, verses 23 through 24, okay? The psalmist writes, search me, God. These are the last 2 verses. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. See if there is any offensive way in me. Lead me in the everlasting way. And so it's interesting that the psalmist says, search me, God. Know my heart. Test me. Know my concerns. Other translations would say, know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me. Lead me in the everlasting way. Here's my challenge to you. Would you make that a prayer this year, this week, as we start thinking about New Year's resolutions or whatever else? Make your resolution. Don't make it just about going to the gym, and then by January 3rd you've already fallen off the wagon. And if you do that, by the way, get back on the wagon on January 4th and keep going to the gym. Would you make your resolution, first of all, God, would you search me? I want to give you, Lord, the ability to search me. Now, he has the ability. He already knows your heart. He already knows your anxious thoughts. He already knows the offensive ways that we surely have in us. Okay? But would you have the heart of that psalmist and say, search me, God, and know my heart? test me and know my concerns. And the idea is so that you know what the issues are, that God shows you the issues that he sees in you. And then would you allow him to lead you in the everlasting way? And I want to give you a couple of thoughts that the pastor had, and I thought they were really good. Here's how we can do this. First, give God your time. Would you commit to giving God your time this year? 2025, next year, I guess. How do you do that? Well, would you commit to praying? We talked about that several months ago about I'm convicted of being prayerless quite often. Would you commit to giving God your time in spending time with him in his word, with him in prayer and with him in his word, and allowing those two things to search you, to be searched in that way? The Bible searches you. It penetrates and it reveals who you are. Even as you learn more about God, you learn more about yourself. Prayer is a way that you hear from God, right? You pour out your concerns to him, you hear from him. Would you give God your time in prayer and in the scripture this year in 2025? Would you commit to that? Would you give him access to you? Say, Lord, would you show me if there's any offensive way in me? I know there are. Would you show them to me? And then would you commit to turning away from them, repenting, right? Just turning, changing your mind and repenting and saying, Lord, I'm sorry. Please forgive me for that. I don't want to do those kinds of things. And would you commit to letting him lead you in the everlasting way? Listen, that hit me pretty hard this week or today, even as I heard it. And I was grateful that I was there. It was a little weird to not be in my own church getting to preach, but I was glad I was there because I needed it. And I think we all do. And I loved sort of the analogy of we get all these recaps of how we spent our year with the streaming services and whatever else. And then the question is, what if we got a recap? If we really, how did we spend our year in 2024 with the Lord? What's it going to look like at the end of 2025? Well, we got a chance to really start the year out on the right foot. And so my prayer is that you would give God your time. You would give him access to your heart. You would let him lead. And the only way you do that is, first of all, you have to know him. For any of this to matter, you have to have trusted him. And so my prayer for those of you who don't yet have a relationship with Christ is that you would see your need for him and that you would turn from your sin and trust him and follow him and allow him to search you, know your heart, test you, know your concerns. That's what's on my heart.
That's awesome. That's one of those sermons that I think there are probably a lot of people squirming in their seats because there aren't very many of us that doesn't hit home to pretty hard. I know one of the things that we talk about with the high schoolers is, how are you using your time? Now, obviously, when you're in school, certain percentage of your day is going to that, and that's fine. And I think it's also fair to say that God wants us to have recreation and relaxation in our lives, that it's not supposed to be all business every day. But at the same time, there's a limit, right? If we're going to be prosperous, I think there's a limit to how much recreation that we can really have in our lives and still be productive. We talk about things like, all right, just think back on your last week and how many hours did you spend playing video games? How many hours did you spend going down the YouTube rabbit hole? There are a number of things that all of us can get involved with where, the time gets away and next thing you know, you've spent 2 hours doing it. You didn't intend for it to be more than 15 minutes, but it's gotten away. And look, in some cases, you could be watching kittens or whatever, but then there are other cases where it's worse than that, in that you're kind of immersing yourself in a lot of things that are negative, violent, things that just are not good for your mind and your soul. And so that's a completely different level. But the bottom line is that we all have more time in our weeks. I say all, would assume it's at least 99% of us, that we have time in our weeks that once it's over and we look back on it, it's like, yeah, you know what? I could have done something more constructive with those 2 hours or those 10 hours or whatever it may be. And the obvious place to go with that is, okay, how could I have used that to get closer to God, to build
That's
that
right.
relationship? And
That's right.
that's what it's all about. It's just better use of our time, because as we all know, we have the same amount of time in a day, every one of us, same number of hours. It's just how do I choose to use them? And I think that's what you're getting at here. And I want to be better in this area. I think every January 1, I want to be better. And so I guess my goal would be let me be better than I was last year.
Well, I want to know God. I want to know God better and love Jesus more. I want to know God more and love him better. That ought to be my goal every day. And it's certainly my goal for 2025. I hear this, okay, and because this is my immediate thing when somebody, when I think pray more. Oh, I don't have time. Get in the Bible more. Oh, I don't have time. Let me just say this. Say that out loud and think about how stupid it and wrong it sounds when what you're actually saying is, I don't have time for God, for the maker of the universe, who wants to have a relationship and spend time with me, which is an amazing thing, and who, if I am following Christ, if I've trusted Christ, is my redeemer. But I don't have time for him. And then you think about and I don't care if your time really was jam-packed with all sorts of air quotes, good things, super busy things, family, work, whatever. Most of the time we know that's not the case, and you were getting at that. There's all sorts of frivolous stuff that we decide to do. We got different priorities than what we ought to have. But even if it was all jam-packed good stuff, none of that stuff matters next to knowing God. And so, guys, could we give God our time? Could we give him access? Could 2025 be a year we resolve to know him better, to give him the time and the room in our lives to know him better and love him more? And I'm just telling you, you will never regret saying, I gave him more time. I gave the Lord more time. You'll never regret that. I promise you. Anyway, that's what's on my heart. And that's my prayer. I don't know. I haven't formulated exactly what that resolution is this year, but I am, and I'm not a big resolutions guy, Brad, but it is my resolve, whether it becomes a formal printed up resolution or not. My resolve is I want to know God better and love him more in 2025 than I have in 2024. And I pray that would be true. That ought to be something we can all do, right? How do I do it? I'm going to give him my time. I'm going to give him my time through prayer and the Bible. And I'm going to give him access to my heart and just say, Lord, I will change what you show me needs to be changed. I will confess it and change it with your help. And I will let you lead me into life with you, into the way everlasting. Psalm 139, 23 and 24. Look that up. The entire psalm is tremendous. But look that up if you guys get a chance.
Well, I'm looking forward to trying again. And I guess no need to wait until January 1, right? Start tomorrow.
Right. Start right. Yeah, exactly. So.
And anyway, I think we all can find another 30 minutes at least in each of our days. Certainly a few times a week that you should be able to find 30 minutes to an hour. And just go from there. Yeah. It is.
That's right.
So. All right. Well, George, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. And now we wrap it up, and we will, when we talk again, we will have semifinals set up and back where we used to end the season, right?
That's right.
2 games, 4 teams, and then we'll go from there. But hopefully we'll get some good ones on the field and have more to talk about. But we really appreciate you joining us as always. And if you want to get in touch with us, also, as always, you can email us at gridirongospelpod@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on X. I'm going to start saying X.
Twitter.
We can say a tweet, right? You send a tweet, but I'm going to try to do the X thing. Reach out on X I am at J. Brad Edwards, and he is at George Schroeder. And I'm sure you have a lot to discuss with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And after we get all our picks wrong, you'll want to do that.
Right.
But hey,
especially the Georgia fans. Yep.
Yeah, especially if you want to talk about faith in Christ, we want to talk with you. We would love to talk with you, but we love college football and would love to do that too. Hey, you can find us, by the way. Most of you probably are listening to us on various podcast platforms. We appreciate you doing that. But you can also find us on our YouTube channel if you just search for Gridiron and the Gospel. If you want to see our pleasant mugs, go for it. That'd be great. So
yeah. And by the way, if you're watching right now, you're wondering what is this duck on Brad's cap? It is obviously not an Oregon Duck. It's actually a minor league baseball team. We'll leave it at that. But
yeah, and I am. My background is a little different than usual, so it is what it is. You can visit us online, by the way, at gridironandthegospel.com. And then also on Twitter or X, by the way, you can find our show handle is at gridiron_gospel. And be sure to rate, review, and subscribe in your favorite podcast app. You can find us on all the major platforms. Just search for Gridiron and the Gospel or follow the links on the show website.
And tune in next week for more Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast.